Hi guys, it's Weedit and I'm here with a mixed media project, sort of some fantasy shrooms. I'm going to be using three different types of media, the Julie Nutting skin tones and hair tones watercolor pencils. Then I'll use Jane Davenport's neutral watercolors and Derwent charcoal. And I realized that you couldn't see what I was drawing, so I switched to a slightly darker color. Then I cut out because I just figured you didn't need to watch me drawing the whole thing. Or maybe I didn't. I thought I did. But this is a fantasy arrangement. You wouldn't find all of these mushrooms growing together. And truthfully, this project can be done with any mixed media that can be layered. So I'm just drawing a bunch of shrooms and mushrooms, and this is a composition I think maybe from Daniel Smith's triads. I used to buy their triads, and they would have little instructions along with it. Obviously I didn't follow those instructions because they only used watercolors on it, and here I'm using a little bit of everything, and I may have changed it. I don't even know. I've just done this particular arrangement for literally years and using just about every type of watercolor and every type of media that I can, because mushrooms are fun. I'm going through, and it really doesn't even matter what colors you use as long as they're earth tones. Or, you know what, it might be fun to do them in non-earth tones, come to think about it. I do an underpainting with the watercolor pencils, and to me, not all of the pigment will liquefy, and I don't like that so much. Some colors liquefy more than others, so I go over it with watercolor, and then I want to add some details on top of that, and so I use the tinted charcoal pencils. Pastels would work as well. Here I'm going in and I'm highlighting the top part of the ruffle on the mushroom, and where the curve goes convex, okay, because it's opening up. Where the curve is opening up on those mushrooms is darker, and so I color in with a darker pencil, and I keep it sort of triangular shape so it fades as it goes towards the top, because the mushroom itself levels out. Now I'm going in and liquefying the colored pencil that I've already laid down. I'm shading the underside, or the top of the stem where it would be lightly shaded. And with this particular project, my light source is coming from the upper right hand corner, and I stick with that for the most part. And one of the things that I try to be careful with when I'm doing this is I alternate the mushrooms and the parts of the mushrooms that I work on, because they touch and I don't want all of the colors blending together. So that becomes a bit of an issue, and in some places you'll see I go through and have to do some fixing because they start blending together. I just got impatient and didn't wait. That's why I'm jumping from the center mushroom to the far left mushroom. I find if I swatch out my pencils, particularly or any kind of media, that particularly something that you can't really tell what color it is, or there's a color shift involved, makes it a whole lot easier when you go in to try and do any type of project. It used to be, and I still do this, that I would grab my colors and swatch them out ahead of time. I even do that on my acrylic pours just to see how the colors work together. But I really like having, and I've got too much media to do it for everything, but slowly but surely I am getting there. But for example, I have so many pastel pencils that I'm not going to swatch those out. I'm just not. There's just too many, and I would never put them back in the right order, and nope, not happening. Pretty much all of my pencils have the tips tinted anyway, and I can use that as a guideline. Same thing with my watercolor pencils. Again, I've collected so many, but when I have a small set, I do go in and try to do that. So I go to the far right hand mushroom, and really it's not an issue as to what colors you use, simply because they're your mushrooms, and you know, these aren't really real mushrooms anyway. They're just sort of a little fantasy. I'm using a flat pencil only because that's what I picked up. I normally work with a filbert, but I didn't in this case, so it was just a matter of convenience, whichever came to my fingers first. And you can see that not all of the watercolor pencil pigment went through and, quote, melted. So that's something that I don't particularly care for. And some pigments melt better than others. But this is a fun project. I did speed it up. I don't even know how much I sped it up. It took me probably 2 hours to do, and that's just because I enjoy doing it. So I really was not in a rush or in a hurry or anything else. And that's another reason why I layered so many, I've used so much media on it. It's fun to do, and I guess extending the time that I get to work on it. This is a project that I have wanted to do since, I think, May. I did a couple of these in May, but I didn't film it, and I wanted to film it for everybody because it is fun. Now there we're looking deep down inside the mushroom. That's the cap that kind of circles over. And looking at it now, I probably should have drawn that stem deeper into the recesses, but you really wouldn't see it. So, and I like the detail that you can get when you do a lot of layering with your media. It makes it more interesting to me. And here I'm trying to shade, even though that mushroom would not necessarily be shaded on that side with the light source coming in, it is shaded from that center mushroom. So I need to show that, and it also helps differentiate between their stems just a little bit. And I hadn't thought of, I like mushrooms because they give me an excuse to use some of my earth tone stuff, my neutrals, in a different way other than, say, skin color or hair color or something. But now I'm thinking I may redo this particular piece using something fun. I don't know, blues and greens, pinks and oranges, something kind of just playful. That might be really fun for some shrooms to do. And this mushroom that I'm doing right now, this is probably my favorite. The way it turned out, I enjoyed this mushroom the most. Now I'm creating a highlight in the center there, and then going around it with increasingly darker colors. And then when we get to the watercolors, I really enjoy playing with it. This mushroom has ruffles on its stems, and right underneath the ruffle you want a shadow, a darker color. The ruffle itself needs to be pretty light, so I'm actually going in with a very light color and then shading it up just a little bit. And I enjoy doing the ruffle mushrooms the most. This one is my favorite to do. And when I'm liquefying the watercolor pencil, one thing I should have mentioned is that I start with the lightest colors usually, and then we'll go to the darker colors. And there, I'm moving my mushroom around. Okay, and on those ruffles, I start at the bottom and work my way up. And I'm pretty much just letting the watercolor do its stuff. Even though it's pencil and I'm liquefying, I really don't try to fuss with it too much. I just let the watercolor do what it's going to do. That's the fun part of watercolor. As much as I can be a control freak, I enjoy the watercolor for that reason. Now I'm done with the color pencil, and I get out my Jane Davenport neutrals, and I just kind of go through and look and see. I'm getting an idea of what colors I'm going to use on what shrooms, and I end up doing a good bit of mixing. Now the Jane Davenport watercolors are fairly opaque. They're not gouache, but they're not as transparent as watercolors that I'm used to working with. And you know, that's just different. It's not good or bad, it's just different. And I do enjoy using them for the mushrooms very much. I enjoy using them for skin tones, but I also enjoy using them for anything where I need earthy tones. And I do see there I'm starting to mix just a little bit, and I've gotten too much, so I start removing right there. I've kind of lost my highlight and my low light, so I'm going in, putting the highlight back in. The highlight, of course, is where the mushroom curves up in the curves, and there I got too much water, and so I'm going in and just trying to keep the light and the dark where they should be. And there we go. So you see me fiddle with this a fair bit, and it's trying to bleed, but I didn't want harsh lines that you would get when you let it dry. So I was working with it wet, and I just had to keep removing. Now, I'm not really thrilled with the underside of the mushroom. That turned out to be far more opaque than I wanted. And see, I should have let the cap dry before I started working on the underside, because it kept bleeding in. But you can always work with it when it's doing that. And you'll see me go in and remove the color where it's bleeding up. But the beauty is, with the watercolors, they can sort of do their thing, and if it's not exactly what I want, I know I'm going to go in with the charcoal pencils, and I can refine using those. So again, this could have been done completely in watercolor pencils. I could have done it completely in watercolor, or I could have done it completely in pastel. It was just fun to mix all the media together to create the mushrooms. So I go in, and I'm not sure if it was a good idea to start with the central, and there I'm removing color to get the stem a little bit more three-dimensional. And you can see that I don't know if it was here, but later on I start blending colors, and I do it right in the pan on the watercolors themselves. Not too terribly worried about it. And that I should not have done. I put water down at the base. It was too dry, and it bloomed. Oh well. And I was not paying attention to how dry the stem had gotten down at the base when I dumped in that water. So, lesson learned, pay more attention. It didn't take away, to me, it didn't take away from the shroom. You know, these are natural elements, and they're going to do their thing. Now see, I started out being good and sort of mixing my colors in the pan, in the mixing wells in the pan, and then I sort of lose it and just start mixing right on top of the colors themselves a little bit later on. There I'm flooding in the color and sort of letting the watercolor do itself. I'm guiding it just a little bit and removing some, and now I'm going to that far, sort of following the same order that I drew them in and that I used the watercolor pencils in, just again to try and keep the colors from blending too much. And I really wanted this guy to be my lightest mushroom. He was the closest to my light source, and I still had to shade the stem where the cap would shade it naturally. So you see me working with that. But you do see me touching in a lot of color and letting it do itself. Now the idea was for me to do the inside here and do it, and that was too dark. That was too much black, so I'm picking it up and trying to get it not quite so black. So I've got more of the brown in there, because I did want it fairly dark. And I wanted that to dry before I worked with the cap, and I didn't quite wait long enough, so I end up having to do some cleanup work. And so I'm trying to avoid it there. And I did fairly well for a little while. And I find it a whole lot easier just to move my painting around or my drawing around as I'm working on it. And some point, I know, if I remember right, I was fighting this and it started bleeding into the cap, and I wasn't terribly happy about that because I just got a little bit too close. And now I'm putting a little more white because I want the top a lighter color. I wanted the top much lighter. Maybe I didn't. I thought I did. I thought I had trouble with that sort of bleeding. Okay, still trying to be sort of good and mixing in the wells. Or maybe it was here that it was bleeding through. Yeah, there we go. The inside of the cap was not quite dry enough, and you can see that darker color bleeding up, and I really kind of liked it. I still worked with it, but I decided in the end if it wanted to bleed up a little bit, I thought maybe it just added a little bit to it, so I let it go. And now I'm working on my favorite mushroom. I know I shouldn't have favorites, that's a bad thing, but I do. This mushroom, this was my favorite. I liked the way the watercolors ended up working with it, and I sort of float them in, and I try to let them just sort of do a little bit of their thing. You see me there moving them and then keeping that highlight. So I work with it a little bit, and then I get to a point where it's sort of like, huh, that's pretty cool. I'm just going to let it go. And I think that's the point right there. Now, I'm going in, and I didn't ever really liquefy that brown that's right underneath. And I do it just a tad. I don't really do much with it. I come underneath it, and I put where the ruffle is. You'll see me put the white in. I'm going into unicorn and lightening there. I lightened up the base just a little bit. I do like how the ruffles turned out. This far left mushroom, I am left-right challenged. The far left one was not my favorite. The ruffly one was my favorite. The far left one was just kind of there, and I wasn't overwhelmingly thrilled. I did not like this really dark color, how it worked out on the base, and I think it's how I've got the mushroom drawn. It just didn't really do it for me. But it was okay-ish. Now I needed to let this dry, so I come back and I have my charcoal, and I also just blended with Q-tips. So I go in and make those seams a little bit more, work on the shadow, and I wanted that defined a little bit more. The ruffles, I felt like I lost some of it, so I go in and I define it just a little bit, and I wanted more depth on the underside. I have no idea what I'm trying to say there. I think it was an eraser I was using. I went over too much on the stalk, so I just erased it. There I'm going in with the white and creating a little bit more white highlight. And using it, just defining the mushroom just a little bit more. And I don't know, I really like pastels on top of watercolors. I really do. I tried to do something with the bloom down there, and it didn't quite cover it, but again, this is, you know, an organic thing, so it doesn't have to be perfect. And there I work on my favorite one just a little bit. I don't want to undo what the watercolors did, but I do want to enhance what they did, so I layered and put the highlight, made the highlight a little bit stronger, and I thought it worked out well. I'm using the dark color again to kind of shade in just a little bit. And again, this turned out to be my favorite one. I like this one. That was I don't know, just my favorite mushroom. And defining that dark edge just a little bit. And apparently I wanted a little more definition and sort of cleaning it up. If you've never tried using like pastel pencils on top of watercolor, I really do strongly recommend it. It seems to me to just be a natural, they naturally work well together. And it's not a desirable trait sometimes, but if you can use chalky watercolors, they will grab the pastel a little bit better than the translucent. And there I'm just sort of, again, further, now I'm defining the rim, and I do something on this that I do want to sort of explain. When I get to the cap on that particular mushroom, I'm hoping I do it in just a minute, but I go, and it needs to be darker right there because that would be a bit in the shadow. Now I go around it, and then I come on the inside and use a lighter color because that tends to make it a little bit more three-dimensional. And I try not to overblend on anything. And this poor little fella, he's my least favorite. I'm not thrilled with him, but I did go in and try to give him some detail, and I had to stop and sharpen my pencil because it just got one of those weird spots in the charcoal, that a piece of filler or something that I had to cut out. So you see me continuously trying to work with that and cut it off. And you know, this little shroom, he's okay. He just didn't come together the way I would like. If you enjoyed the video, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe for more. I had a lot of fun doing this. I ended up using 3 different colors to kind of provide a ground since I didn't want my mushrooms growing in thin air. And I went in with this green, and I go in with a slightly darker color to indicate, okay, it's a little bit more shaded where the mushrooms are. And then I add shadows in with a purpley color. So it's sort of unusual colors that I use, but shadows they do tend to be in the purple range. And yeah, there I go in with a slightly darker green, just to indicate that the ground would be darker where my mushrooms are. And yes, I know mushrooms wouldn't be growing in green stuff, but I'd used enough brown in my mushrooms that I wanted something a little bit darker and different than more brown. And now I pick up, I think it's called lavender. Yep, lavender, to go in and just shadow around them. Give it a little bit more dimension. And every time I go in and do the shadowing, I do a smaller area and a smaller area. And there you go. Thank you so much, guys. Bye.